Greetings, it is I, Countess Naravan Dracovin, Lord and Emperor of the Dracovin Empire, and welcome. It is time to continue my discussion on the Pathfinder role-playing game system, where I've been going over the races of Pathfinder. Now, I'm not talking about the common races, your elves, your humans, your dwarfs, your halflings. No, I'm talking about those uncommon and unusual races that people don't play as much. I'm going to be talking to you about playing them, information about them, description, some of the things you might want to know before you make a choice on playing these characters. So today for you, I have the Goblins! So goblins, of course, are a very destructive race. They live for both destruction and to fill their bellies. They have a voracious appetite, constantly seeking to shove food down into their gullets and devour everything they can. They're oftentimes childlike, but these tendencies in them make them universally despised. They are weak pushovers, so oftentimes more powerful creatures will use them as minions, either cannon fodder in some kind of war, or just something to work for them when they need someone to shine their shoes. Goblins oftentimes fill those roles because of their very nature. They are a disposable foot soldier that's easily manipulated or enslaved. Now, those that have a little bit of wits to them might find themselves on the outskirts of civilization. There they kind of fend for scraps, picking up what they can from the stronger, bigger creatures, or perhaps taking advantage of the other weaker creatures in the fringes too, becoming a boss in themselves. Generally speaking though, regardless of the race, most of them see a goblin and see them as some kind of vermin which are impossible to exterminate. Now a goblin, it can eat anything. It's omnivorous, but they prefer meat. And the meat that they favor the most is human or no meat. Those are delicacies that they can rarely get, but when they do, Now, they do actually fear the bigger races. They know that most of the time they can squash them like bugs. But goblins have short memories, and those appetites can drive them to do some stupid things, like declaring war again, or going on raids against other races that, well, they're hoping to fill their larders with enough stuff to keep them going for quite a while. Now, goblins are these kind of scrawny, 3-foot-tall humanoids that are very ugly. They have these kind of comically oversized heads, oftentimes without hair at all, though some of them do have a little bit. They have massive ears and these beady little eyes that either can be red or sometimes yellow. Now, their skin tone actually varies completely. It's going to depend on the kind of environment they are. Things like grays, browns, and greens are quite common, though you can actually find some unusual skin colors in goblins, such as whites and blacks. It's again just an environmental factor that it seems that their skin adapts to the area, well, they're from. One of the defining characteristics that you'll always see is their big smile full of jagged, pointy teeth that represents their voracious appetite. Now, Goblin Society. That's an interesting one to talk about. If they're out on their own, you'll find them oftentimes in tribal situations, where the strong rule over them with an iron fist, so to say. But Goblin Society is a terrible one. They oftentimes have very few people that are skilled at making things, especially skilled at hunting and farming. So they like to settle in areas with a lot of available food, or places that they can easily go on raids to other civilizations and other communities and take things from them, with the hopes of then filling their bellies. It's an interesting catch that they have in their own society. Because of their nature, they oftentimes have very primitive structures. Their buildings are oftentimes these ramshackled things, small hovels, built out of ruins themselves. They're terrible at making fortifications and defenses, so they're oftentimes driven out of a lot of areas very easily. So they seek those inhospitable places where other races wouldn't settle, because they can fit in there and it provides a little bit of that natural barrier to other people coming in. They might not look there. No one wants to go there. Abandoned structures and buildings are definitely a plus when you're looking for real estate and being a goblin. Now, occasionally you do get goblins that are, well, skilled. Skilled at farming, skilled at tool work. Unfortunately, most of the time, they don't use tools or items of their own. They have to use things that they've borrowed from other civilizations, and primarily humans most of the time. So you might have the goblin farmer, who's excellent at farming, but he's probably using a bunch of human tools in order to do it. Granted, he's going to be an asset to the tribe, and they're going to keep him around, because guess what? He's making a lot of good food. The thing about them is, though, they still have those voracious appetites and incredibly poor planning skills, oftentimes, especially when it comes to a group of goblins. So this means that usually it's the strongest one that can kind of push himself above the other that's going to put himself in that position of leadership. And he's going to maintain this strength by sending the goblin tribe out on raids to other people. Because the youth of the goblins, well, they're all up and for this. They want to do something. They want some action. And most of them will probably die during the course of this time. Meaning me, the elder goblin who has gotten here through strength, well, I don't have to worry about some young upstart taking over from me. He's dying. He's going all brave and crazy in those raids. Now, it is important to note that both goblin men and women are just as ugly as the other, and both of them can provide rules in the tribe. Leadership is not just male. It's whoever is strongest. If there's a female goblin that tends to be stronger than the rest of them, and, well, she's in charge then. Goblin babies, though? Oof, they are not treated well. They are given self-sufficiency very early, and oftentimes infants are treated as nothing more than pets of the tribe. In fact, youth mortality is very high. A lot of young goblins die. The fact is, most of the time that tribes throw their youth into pens or cages, and at that point in time, the reason most of them die is because, well, they forget to be fed. Because someone forgets to feed the pets, basically. It happens a lot. And so, unfortunate part of goblin lifestyle is that many young goblins learn that if things get really bad, cannibalism is an option. They're hated by other races. It's the easiest way to say it. Every other race pretty much hates them. They have a particular hatred for gnomes, so if they should get a gnome, it's a feast when they eat the gnome, and it's a celebration. The only race that really gives them any kind of leeway is half-orcs, because they recognize they've got the same kind of origin as the goblins, but goblins are scared of half-orcs, so don't really recognize that they're being treated that way. Because of their overall nature, when you're looking at alignments for goblins, the vast majority of them are chaotic evil. They love chaos, they love destruction, they love eating, they love a lot of crazy things that brings them to the forefront of these things. Not necessarily chaotic evil, but most are. Now, you do find curious and explorative goblins. They become Goblin Adventures. Unfortunately, the thing about Goblin Adventures is most of them don't have a long lifespan. They tend to go off and adventure in places that their curiosity and other relations with races and groups tends to be dangerous to them. Because most races would hunt them down just without thinking, and they're known for their mindless destruction, which they can still bring as an adventurer. They oftentimes find themselves having to go to the fringes of places to adventure, or the wilds, in order to find places where they can, well, go and maybe be kept alive. Goblin adventurers prefer things like mounts. They prefer mounted combat with archery, and usually they're going to be on very exotic mounts like goblin dogs or something else, maybe a warg. Or they are known to have a good number of alchemists and spellcasters which specialize in fire magic. Fire is a friend of the goblins, and they love to show it off. Effectively, it's stuff that spreads mayhem and destruction. Some of their favorite things. Now, before we continue with talking about what you get as a goblin character, we want to talk about actually playing a goblin character. This is important stuff. Your game master could play up having a goblin character in two different ways. The first off is Team of Goblins. Team of Goblins is fun to do. There are some pre-made adventures done by Pathfinder that have a bunch of characters be, well, goblins. You could try one of those out or write one on your own. The other route which you could take, which again, you could take a similar route for the Team of Goblins, is, well, again, not all goblins are chaotic evil. You can have neutral ones, you can have good ones. You could have a goblin that, because of his, beliefs or whatever raising, is lawful. Goblins could be put into positions where they are the exception to the rule of the race of monsters, and maybe want to do something to raise them up. A good example might be you're a goblin historian who's trying to find the true history of goblins that's been lost to, well, the insanity of goblins. You might be raised by a church because you were taken in as a youth, and maybe you see the your fellow goblins and their backwards views, worshipping things like maybe demons, as a terrible thing that needs to be fixed somehow. There are lots of opportunities for character creation and being a goblin, and sticking to building a character that works with others. That's the thing that you're going to have to look at. If I'm playing a goblin, I'm going to have to say how it's going to work with playing with the team. Playing a monster with a heart of gold is fun. It can be a great role-playing opportunity. But again, you're going to have to look to do some of the opposites of way goblins act. You're going to have to reverse some of these things. Not everything. The ravenous hunger, the love of songs, twisted sense of humor, and a respect for nature are 4 important aspects of goblins that you can bring into any goblin character. Even one that's lawful good could have a twisted sense of humor, could have that ravenous appetite, a love of a good song, and a respect of nature that would make sense. And these things still work with a group of player characters. So there are core aspects of what makes you a goblin you can retain. You just get rid of things like the love of destruction and the crazy plans, the raiding. Probably want to avoid the human gnome eating too. So you're definitely going to want to talk with a game master before you play a goblin. And it's going to be very important that even then, you're going to have to play it coolly. Because people hate goblins. So if you show up, you're going to probably have to at least have a little bit of diplomacy to keep non-goblins from stabbing you in the face right away. You know, make sure that you do things that show off the fact that, hey, I'm not like my kinfolk. But anyway, that's just an important thing to note when we're talking about playing a goblin. You're going to have to look at this one very carefully. Let's talk about the characteristics of a goblin. So, goblins. They gain a big bonus to dexterity, but lose some strength and charisma. They are small. An important note that you use the stats for a small-sized creature, but their speed is 30. They're known for their exceptionally fast speed for being a small creature. They get skill bonuses to both stealth and ride. They're particularly known for riding mounts like things like goblin dogs, so you're best at that, and you're good at being stealthy, and they have dark vision. That's it. Pretty simple. Now, there are a lot of racial options you can look at. The majority of these change around the skills you gained from the bonuses to stealth and or ride to other things. Skilled is the main thing that they do give up. Now, granted, there are other things that you can change. You could have an extra big head and be able to bite things and gain a bite attack. You could be better suited to eating anything, to basically scavenging. That way you kind of resist diseases and poisons that might be in your foods. Some of them are familiar with specialized goblin weaponry. There are ones that can climb, if you're bored in a cave. Others that are good with trees, climbing those. And some that even have extra large big ears for better perception. Now, of course, similar to the fact that there is a lot of goblin racial traits, there are a number of actual traits. I'm not going to dive into the traits, but there are a bunch of them that play off of the goblin's abilities and improve them. Some of them that work to do with their love of fire, others that work off their own skills. You might want to check them out if your game master is using traits. But let's talk about favored class bonuses, because I always like to discuss these. Goblins get some really good ones. First off, Bard. If you take the Bard favorite class bonus, you get an extra round of performance. That doesn't seem like a lot. Okay, 20 extra rounds of performance at 20th level? Trust me, as someone that's played Bards in Pathfinder, there are ways that you can eat up those rounds of performance for extra bonuses. Spells which allow you to use multiple performances at once, using up multiple rounds of your performance. So you can eat up that 20 extra pretty good, and that's some kind of bonus that might help a lot. Now, both sorcerers and witch goblins get bonus spells. Sorcerer goblins in particular, they learn spells of one level less than the maximum they could learn, but they have to have the fire descriptor. So yes, as a goblin, I would learn 20 extra fire spells, but guess what? That's still not bad. If you're planning for a blaster-type sorcerer, pretty good. The witch, because they're more like a wizard in the way they learn spells, the bonus isn't as powerful as knowing spells with the sorcerer, but yes, you gain extra spells. You gain one lower than your lower level every level, up to that maximum of 20th level where you gain an 8th level spell that your familiar knows, because your familiar is effectively your spell book. That's still pretty damn good. That's still a lot of extra spells that you wouldn't have to either copy from somewhere else into your familiar, or basically use up a scroll to learn them into. It still adds a lot of variety to your witch character. So, witch goblins, also very good. Now, Goblin Alchemists have one archetype. So they're the big class archetype. So the big class archetype we want to talk about. They're good for taming, well, giant flying creatures. They're specifically called a winged marauder. So the big thing that they get is they replace their mutagen with a tamed beast, a dire bat or a giant vulture that acts like an animal companion. Now granted, they don't get things like the share spell, but otherwise it functions exactly like an animal companion that you would have as a druid, except it's a big vulture. Now you also change your skills around, your skill proficiencies as a winged marauder, and you do get access to one discovery that helps you enhance your animal, your winged creature. So it's a very interesting and different kind of goblin that you might want to take. Winged mount goblin. Now, of course, there are a bunch of racial feats you can take as a goblin. There's only 4 I particularly want to talk about today out of all of them because these are pretty good 4. First off, Battle Singer. This is an interesting one because you can choose to have all your bardic performances be vocal and be in goblin. The advantage of this is that only creatures that understand goblin can gain your morale bonus. Now you say, that actually kind of sucks. What about my teammates? They might not get it. Well, there's in where the problem lies and where the bonus applies. Those of you that can understand Goblin of my allies get my Inspire Courage bonus not just to saves versus fear, but to all saves. That's a big bonus. That's a very good bonus. So, making sure your team of friends learns Goblin so you can sing to them a heroic Goblin song is actually a really good idea. Now, Fire Hand's an interesting one. You gain Proficiency Torch. You can use a torch as a weapon. You get an extra bonus when you're using the torch. That's pretty much it. But it's an interesting thing that you can do, that you can have an alternate fire-based weapon without normal penalties. Flameheart's good because it gives you resistance 5. And if you're an alchemist or spellcaster, you use spells of the fire descriptor or the bombs that an alchemist would throw as if you were 1 level higher when you use these. That's an interesting and important one. I treat it as if I'm 1 level higher for everything there. And finally, there's Roll With It, which I wanted to mention, which is a fun one. You can make an acrobatics check to effectively avoid damage from an attack. When you use it, you roll back. So you do have to have a certain amount of distance to roll to really avoid it. But basically, you take the hit and you go tumbling backwards somewhere, which it can go pretty far distance because it's based upon the damage being dealt. Effectively, every 6 points of damage you would have taken is 6 feet of movement. So it's 1 to 1. 1 damage, 1 foot of movement. You would have somehow avoided 50 damage, which is pretty impossible for an acrobatics check, but maybe 20th level you've done it. 50 feet back? It's like, whoa! Roll With It's an interesting one. But anyway, that's it for today. So, I introduced you to goblins. I talked about playing a goblin, talked about their society, all the important things you're going to need to know to be a goblin. Now, again, important note, talk with your GM before you choose goblin. You're going to see if they allow it. And you're going to discuss what kind of character you're going to do. We talked about it then in the episode. I'm noting it now, it's important. But I hope you're having a great day. If you have any stories of you playing a goblin, or maybe you have some interesting encounters with goblins, leave it in the description below. And until the next time, I bid you farewell.